The millionaire will pay a homeless lady to have an infant, but whilst the kid was born, he was shocked through what he noticed. Before we start the tale, remark, underneath with the city, you're watching from experience. The story, everybody. Henry Lewis was a 12 months vintage guy who had the entirety, money, power and repute, but that night he found out that despite all the luxury around him, there was one component his cash hadn't offered an heir. He wished a child, but Henry failed to need a family inside the traditional experience. He had attempted twice, and each marriages led to failure and sadness. He conceived love became an illusion, something that only introduced troubles. However, the toddler was distinct. It became unfunding, a continuation of the whole thing he had built, and now he became determined. Now, not to trying to find a dating for this. He wished a clear settlement without emotional entanglements, only a agreement. He knew that with his sources, he could locate a person willing to hold the pregnancy without questions or emotional ties. For Henry, this became a transaction, and, like all his transactions, he might have overall manipulate. Now he simply had to locate someone who might take delivery of the deal the next morning. Henry Lewis drove his sports activities vehicle via the town streets, his mind but turned into targeted on locating someone who might receive the settlement, and at the same time as stopped at a mile near downtown. Something struck his interest. On the corner of the sidewalk, a young meal sat at the ground drawing on a chunk of dirty paper. She had messy brown hair falling over her face, and her blue eyes shone. No matter her worn-out tide equals one look, she regarded invisible to others. But something about her caught Henry's eye. He tried to disregard her, however. While the mild became inexperienced, he appeared again, a notion who attracts at the sidewalk as though not anything else exists. Irritated with himself, he sped away, leaving her behind, however. A few blocks away, something stricken him. He stopped in a parking zone and sat there, watching the steerage wheel, when an idea got here to him. This is ridiculous, he said to himself, but his intuition pushed him. Lower back reluctantly, he became the car around and returned to wherein he had seen her there. She turned into simply the identical, now leaning the paper in opposition to the wall. He pulled up to the cutback and rolled down the window. His tone direct and cold. Hello, you. Come here. The younger lady looked at him with suspicion, her eyes narrowed, comparing the well-dressed man in the sports activities automobile. She hesitated. I'm not asking. Come on. I don't have all day, he insisted, not changing his tone. Slowly and reluctantly she approached, while she finally stood subsequent to the car. Her thinness and the wear of her look were even more obtrusive. Regardless of this, there was something in her posture, within the way she looked at him. What do you want? She asked, her voice low, but firm. Henry studied her for a second, earlier than responding. Get in, I will take you somewhere we can speak. She laughed dry. I'm not one of those, if that is what you are questioning. He frowned, virtually irritated with the aid of the assumption. Don't be absurd. I do not have time for that. I just need to talk. Now get in. The vehicle, or you could preserve living on that sidewalk. The hesitation was nevertheless there. However, something in his authoritative tone left her no room for argument. Ultimately, she opened the door and got within. The silence among them within the vehicle changed into heavy, but Henry failed to appear to thoughts. He drove to a quiet cafe far away from the town noise and parked. What is your call? He asked as they sat at a table inside the corner. Lee Parker. However, why does it matter? She retorted, retaining a suspicious appearance due to the fact I need to recognize who I am coping with. Inform me, Illila. Why do you sit down at the sidewalk drawing as though nothing else matters? She shrugged, fending off his gaze. What else is there to do? I have nowhere to go. I misplaced the entirety, but it's none of your business. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table. Proper. I'll get directly to the point. I want to make you an offer, something that can alternate your life. Her eyes narrowed. And what could that be? I need you to have a toddler for me. Leela blinked as if she hadn't heard, efficaciously. You're joking, right? No, it is a critical. Provide I'll cover all of your costs, come up with full support for the duration of the being pregnant, and In the end you will get an amount that will ensure you by no means should fear. Approximately money. Once more she set free a frightened snort, crossing her fingers. This is a shaggy dog story proper. What kind of guy makes such a suggestion to a stranger? The type of man who knows what he desires and does not waste time. I do not want a dating Lila. I don't want emotional drama, just a baby, simple as that. Leah stared at Henry as if he had lost his mind. His phrases echoed in her thoughts. I need you to have my child as a whole lot. As she desired to dismiss his notion as absurd, something in Henry's gaze told her he was genuinely severe. His bloodless, old good judgment hit her, difficult, leaving her torn among her dignity and the cruel reality of her existence. This is madness. Lila, in the end, broke the silence. No woman in her proper mind could comply with something like this. Henry failed to appearance away, keeping the calculated posture that got here so obviously to him. No girl to your role might refuse, he replied bluntly. I'm offering you a manner out, consolation, balance, and a new existence in alternate for something you already have the capability to undergo. A toddler Layla crossed her palms, looking to preserve a facade of resistance, but deep down she knew he became right. She became in a state of affairs wherein each day changed into a struggle to live, to tell the tale. Even so, the concept of giving up something so non-parlement for money made her stomach churn. And then, she asked, her voice heavy with skepticism, what takes place after the toddler is born? Henry relaxed barely in his chair as though he had expected the query. After the toddler is born, you will acquire a great son to start your life over. No strings attached. You may be unfastened to do anything you need no strings connected. She let out a humorless snort and away. Do I understand you won't change your mind and drag me into courtroom later? He studied her cautiously before answering. Layla, I'm a businessman. I don't input into agreements without making sure all events benefit you. You'll have a legally binding contract. Neither of us could be able to exchange the phrases later on. Now, let's have a laugh with the ones who handiest read the feedback type. Milkshake inside the remarks, best. The ones who've read this a ways will apprehend. Now, return to the story. Layla fell silent, soaking up his words. The promise of security, even supposing brief, become tempting. She had nothing, not even an area to sleep that night-time, but she additionally knew she turned into at the verge of creating a life-altering selection. And what if I say no? She challenged, leaning barely forward. Henry gave a faint smile. Then you definitely cross back to the streets. You keep scraping through, facing the bloodless and the hunger. The selection is yours. His phrases landed like a blow. She desired to hate him for being so blunt. However, she hated even more the truth in them. He had subsidized her right into a nook, and she or he knew it. However, there was one greater issue she needed to ask. Why are you doing this? She demanded. A person like you, with all your cash, why no longer adopt a child, or discover one of these rich girls who love showing off their ideal kids? Henry took a deep breath before answering, his tone greater extreme than earlier. Then, because I need something, it truly is mine, an heir of my personal blood, and due to the fact adopting or getting worried with someone in my social circle brings headaches I'm now not inclined to deal with. I won't manipulate Layla, nothing extra, not anything less. The coldness in his phrases made her look away, unsettled. She knew he turned into being sincere, which only made her experience more vulnerable. I want time to assume, suppose, she said finally, seeking to regain some control over the scenario. Henry nodded as if he had predicted this reaction. You've got 24 hours. After that, do not bother contacting me. He stood up and walked towards the door. Without any other word, Lila watched as he disappeared, feeling as even though she became being pulled right into a whirlwind. She may never get away strolling through the streets. Leia's thoughts raced. Henry's words echoed in her thoughts. Comfort, balance, a new existence. She knew all too nicely what it intended to have. Nothing. The biting bloodless of the night stung her skin, a reminder that day after today might bring the same struggles. The combat for meals, the steady fear, and The humiliation of being invisible to the world. She sat on a park bench staring at the overcast sky. Her mum used to say that possibilities simplest knock as soon as, and it's as much as you to decide whether to seize them or allow them to slip away. But at what fee, she puzzled, having a baby at the same time as part of a deal become a enormous choice. However, what if it turned into her only chance to get away, the countless cycle of misery? Meanwhile, Henry sat in his dwelling room, reviewing agreement his attorneys had meticulously prepared. He hated waiting, but he knew Layla didn't have many alternatives. Regardless, he had already calculated the dangers. If she declined, he'd pass on to a person else, easy as that. The sound of the intercom interrupted his mind. He picked up, hearing his reception voice informed him that Layla had arrived. "Ship her up," he replied, his tone impartial. "Lena, later." The door opened and Lila walked in. Her eyes were tired, but decided I'd be given, she stated bluntly, earlier than Henry should say whatever. He stood up, watching her carefully. There has been no hesitation in her expression, only a company decision. First rate, letun make this professional. He motioned for her to sit down while he picked up the contract from the desk. Leela checked out the file, reading the terms carefully. The circumstance had been clear. She would be sorted in the course of the pregnancy, with all her fees paid, and in the stop she could acquire an enormous amount to restart her existence in Go Back. She might give up any rights to the toddler. "This appears very last," she murmured as she read. "That's exactly what I need," Henry answered, "and that I desire. It's what you want too." Layla took a deep breath and, after a second of hesitation, picked up the pen with a quick emotion. She signed her call, sealing the settlement that could alternate their lives forever. The signing of the agreement sealed extra than only a deal. It marked a new segment in Leela Parker's existence. That same day she turned into, escorted via Stephanie Henry's assistant, to a black car waiting at the construction's end. Entrance as she regarded out the automobile window, the city, which had as soon as felt overwhelming, now regarded to offer something different, a hazard to start over. Layla didn't talk an awful lot at some point of the ride to Henry's mansion, but Stephanie attempted to break the silence. "You may just like the location. It is quiet, spacious, and, most importantly, relaxed." The pleasant tone contrasted with the bloodless environment of the contract she had just signed. Leia simply nodded, nonetheless, processing the whole thing that had befell within the past few hours while the auto finally arrived at the mansion. Her eyes widened, the huge iron gate opened, revealing ASS surrounded with the aid of impeccably maintained gardens. At the center was the mansion, an enforcing marble and glass shape that regarded as bloodless and calculating as the person who owned it. Stephanie led her interior, and Layla barely had time to take inside the extravagant details: crystal chandeliers, extensive marble staircases, and furniture that looked love. It got here immediately out of a layout magazine made her uncomfortable. This wasn't her world, but for now it'd be her new reality. "I'll display you to your room," Stephanie said with a grin. It's one of the excellent suites in the house." Layla followed in silence. Upon coming into the room, she turned into greeted by using a large bed with linen sheets, floor to ceiling, home windows, and a bathroom larger than any condominium she had ever lived in. "In case you want something, just call me. We are right here to attend to you," Stephanie brought earlier than leaving her alone. Leah sat on the brink of the bed, strolling her hands over the soft fabric of the sheets. It'd become odd till yesterday. She were dozing on cold sidewalk walks, and now she became surrounded by way of luxurious. However, as relaxed because it was there, was nonetheless something heavy in the air. She knew she wasn't a visitor. She was a part of her enterprise deal. In the days that observed Layla attempted to regulate to the brand new routine, food was served directly, and a crew of medical doctors was employed to conduct preliminary exams as anticipated. Henry stored his distance. He was centered on work, hardly ever acting across the house, except to test the reports. Stephanie G. him on Lila's development. On one of those uncommon activities they crossed paths inside the hallway. Leia was leaving a clinical appointment when she noticed Henry taking walks towards her, along with his standard impeccable posture and severe appearance. "Are you okay?" he asked, his tone greater out of obligation than subject. Leah hesitated before answering. "The whole thing is as anticipated, I wager." He nodded now, not deepening the conversation, however. Before, on foot away, he gave her one remaining look. If you want something," asked Stephanie. "I want you to be nicely." She did not realize what to make of that comment. Turned into it true kindness or only a way to make certain the settlement went easily both way? That brief come-upon lingered in her thoughts, even though she became being dealt with like a queen. Layla could not ignore the dilemmas that began to get up inside her during a silent night. She walked to the balcony of her room and checked out the significant garden illuminated by the moonlight. The entirety changed into so calm to this point from the reality she knew. "Am I doing the proper element?" she idea, hugging herself against the cold wind. The concept of carrying an infant and then giving it away appeared an increasing number of complicated, and although the settlement made it clean she would haven't any rights to the child, she did not recognize how she would manage it emotionally. Meanwhile, Henry watched the whole lot from a distance. He knew Lila turned into resilient, but he additionally recognized that she carried full-size emotional weight, no matter his bloodless demeanor. He felt a faint twinge of interest, approximately her, who became this lady who had time-honored such an uncommon proposal, and why couldn't he completely shake the sensation that perhaps she became more than just a part of a plan? One evening Lila became inside the dwelling room, surfing via an e-book from the shelf. She wasn't a fan of classic literature, however. There was something comforting approximately the quiet of the house and the scent of antique books. Henry walked in, surprising her. He appeared distracted, preserving a folder of documents in his hand. "I failed to count on to locate you right here," he said, preventing inside the middle of the room. "I did not anticipate you to talk to me," she responded with a sarcastic smile. He frowned but did not reply right away. As an alternative, he positioned the folder at the desk and sat down in a close-by armchair. "Are you settling in?" he asked, crossing his arms. "I suppose so," she replied hesitantly, "but it still feels strange. It would not feel real." Henry leaned forward barely. "It does have to sense abnormal. This is a contract, Layla, and settlement. I guarantee you everything could be done precisely as planned." "It's what you do, isn't it?" she said with a hint of defiance. "Plan the entirety, calculate the whole lot, leave no room for errors." He looked at her closely, as though finding out whether or not the conversation become really worth continuing. "It really is how I have built the whole thing. I have planning prevents failure," he subsequently replied. Lila gave a brief chortle, shaking her head once in a while. "Failure is inevitable. You may plan the entirety, but you can't control the way you feel." Henry, her words hit him like a blow. He leaned again inside the chair without replying. Lila observed his response, however. Didn't push. In addition, she sincerely picked up the e-book from the shelf and headed to her room, leaving Henry alone, deep in idea. The days went through and Leah Parker began adjusting to life in Henry Lewis's mansion. At the same time as the surroundings was grand and cozy, she could not shake the feeling of not belonging. Every steeply packed piece of furniture, every decorative item regarded to scream that this wasn't her vicinity still. She accompanied the routine, frequent scientific appointments, food prepared by chefs, notwithstanding the comfort. An emotional emptiness lingered at night time. Alone in her room, she notioned approximately what she had left at the back of no longer. That it was much, however, it changed into the simplest lifestyles she had recognized. Now the whole thing felt out of manage. What would it not be like to carry an infant and then hand it over? She tried to push the one's thoughts away, but they haunted her, specifically in the stillness of the nighttime. At the same time as Leela grappled with her inner conflicts, Henry watched her from a distance. He maintained a reserved demeanor, however, determined himself curious. Even amidst his commitments and conferences, he regularly stuck himself thinking about her. It wasn't romantic or emotional, at the least not. But, however, an interest he could not quite provide an explanation for. One afternoon, returning domestic after a long day of conferences, Henry discovered Lila inside the garden. She became sitting on a bench. Her face became towards the sky. The scene contrasted with the difficult picture he had of her for a moment. He hesitated to technique, but eventually walked over to her, enjoying the garden. He asked, in his company, direct tone, "Lila," grew to become slightly amazed, however. Fast answered, "Its quality, absolutely better than the streets." He sat beside her, keeping a long way. There has been something disarming, approximately Lila's honesty. "Are you settling in?" he requested. Lila shrugged, looking at the flowers in the front of her. "It nevertheless feels odd, like I am dwelling someone else's lifestyles." Henry remained silent for a second earlier than replying, "It's all a part of the settlement. I need you to have the whole lot you want." "So, matters cross as deliberate," she echoed with a hint of irony. "Do you usually live like this, planning each second of your lifestyles?" Henry looked at her, surprised. By using the question, he turned into use to people who, without a doubt, agreed with him, who never challenged him making plans. "Is what continues the whole thing going for walks?" he said firmly. "Without it, the whole lot falls aside." Layla gave a faint smile, shaking her head. "I do not suppose everything may be controlled on occasion. Things simply manifest, whether you want them to or—" No longer her words unsettled him greater than he anticipated. He stood up all at once, finishing the communication. "If you want anything, allow Stephanie," recognize he stated earlier, then heading returned inside the house. A few days later, Henry decided to accompany Lila to one in all her medical appointments. He justified his presence with the aid of saying he desired to make certain the whole thing turned into going nicely. However, deep down he felt a growing duty for the state of affairs. Lila, confirmed no marvel, however, was inwardly intrigued. Via his choice at the doctor's workplace, the standard examinations were carried out, and for the first time they heard the toddler's heartbeat. Lila felt a wake wave of unexpected emotion, her eyes packed with tears, but she attempted to cover it. Henry, on the other hand, remained nevertheless. His expression turned into tough to study, however. Something in his gaze had modified. It turned into as though that easy sound had touched something internal him that he wasn't prepared to stand. "The whole thing seems ideal," said the physician, smiling. "You could begin considering what you need to do subsequent, like prenatal care and the following steps." Leah nodded, but Henry remained silent. At the manor returned to the mansion. The silence in the vehicle was heavy. Henry turned into visibly considerate, and Leela couldn't discover the proper phrases to fill the space among them when they sooner or later arrived. He opened the door for her, an easy gesture that surprised her. "Thank you for these days," Leela said as she were given out of the car. "It changed into the least I should do," Henry responded, no longer looking immediately at her. "I will make sure the whole thing maintains to go well." Leela watched him as he walked into the mansion, his posture continually impeccable, however. There has been something exclusive, approximately him. Maybe the sound of the heartbeat had touched a part of Henry that he kept hidden, or maybe it turned into just her imagination in the following days. Layla started out to note small modifications Henry regarded greater regularly within the not unusual areas of the house, and their conversations, although short, appeared much less mechanical. He asked approximately the info of her appointments, how she changed into feeling, and even cautioned sports to assist her relax. One night, even as they were eating in silence at the huge eating table, Henry broke the habit and requested, "Have you notion approximately what you need to do after all this is over?" Lilo turned into surprise. Through the query, it became the first time he had proven any interest in her future. "I haven't any plans," she replied. "Surely I still do not know what my life will be like after this." Henry nodded, seeming to. "Don't forget her solution. You'll have the sources to start over in whichever you want. Just ensure you do something profitable." Layla checked out him, intrigued. In the back of the calculated coldness there regarded to be a hint of authentic difficulty. She did not know the way to interpret it. But for the first time she failed to sense absolutely alone within the mansion. One morning, Layla found a package deal left at the entrance of her room. It became a gift wrapped. impeccably with a small handwritten word to help with your free time become a new sketchbook and excessive quall pencils. Layla became speechless. She didn't realize that Henry knew approximately her love for drawing. At some point of certainly one of their early conversations, she had casually noted how she used to distract herself, but she in no way anticipated him to recall, not to mention care that night while she changed within the garden. Henry surpassed through her and stopped for a moment. "Did you want the gift he requested?" casually assured Layla. Leah spoke back, preserving the sketchbook. "Thank you. I failed to assume this," Henry shrugged. "It regarded like something that could be proper for you." Layla smiled, maintaining the gift greater firmly. It changed into she responded sincerely. Layla commenced to comprehend that the recurring within the mansion, notwithstanding being nicely deliberate, at ease became not sufficient to dispel the internal conflict surrounding her. Every day delivered a new experience of vacancy, as though she had been bodily gift, but disconnected from what was happening around her. Even as Henry maintained his standard company demeanor, Leela felt there has been something more to the person that he failed to let show one morning. She turned into surprise. With the aid of an surprising request from Henry, he desired them to talk after breakfast, something that seemed abnormal given the distance he usually maintained. Once they completed, Leela met him inside the sitting room, where he waited, subsequent to a stack of papers. "I want to speak about a few extra info of the agreement," he stated. Immediately, Layla's heart tightened, imagining he become approximately to impose new situations. "More info, idea, the entirety become already settled," she responded, looking to cover her tension. Henry watched her for a second earlier, then continuing, "It's nothing that modifications the terms. I simply want to ensure you understand how things will be after the start. I want to avoid any surprises." Layla took a deep breath, looking to live calm. "I suppose I am getting it. I will go away and you will cross on with your lifestyles." He gave a small nod. "Yes. But I want you to understand that, in case you need whatever in a while, no matter the settlement, I will be available to assist. I do not want you to experience abandoned." She raised an eyebrow, amazed by way of the provide. His tone became specific, as though he changed into attempting to expose a consideration that hadn't been there before. "It really is unexpected coming from you," she said, unable to hide her sarcasm. Henry just shrugged. "I do not want headaches. And this is the satisfactory way to avoid them," Layla chuckled. But there was something about his seriousness that made her reconsider her sarcasm. Perhaps he honestly was trying to be special, although he did not pretty know how. Later that day, Layla decided to discover the mansion further. The place became colossal, with apparently endless hallways and rooms decorated with artwork that in all likelihood priced greater than she could imagine. As she wondered, she got here throughout a small exam, and at the end of a hallway the door became barely ajar, and he or she peeked. Inner Henry was sitting at the table, but he failed to seem to running. He became, keeping a framed photo in his hands, staring at it. Layla could not make out the info of the picture, but something approximately his posture struck her interest. It was the first time she'd visible him like this, vulnerable, lost in thought. She knocked softly on the door, and he quick-set the picture back at the table. "Sorry, I didn't suggest to interrupt," she said hesitantly. Henry seemed up, actually amazed to peer her. "It's nothing," he responded, returning to his impartial expression. "Did you want something?" "No, I was just exploring the house." Leia hesitated, feeling like she needed to say more. "You seemed like you had been thinking about something essential." Henry stayed silent for a moment before replying. "All of us have things we would instead hold to ourselves." Sensing he did not want to continue that topic, she shifted the verbal exchange. "This residence is big. Do you live right here by myself all of the time?" He nodded, crossing his arms. "It is greater practical than it seems. I don't like distractions, and here are the gap I need." Leia studied him for a moment, looking to apprehend how someone could live surrounded through a luxury but appear so lonely that have to be ordinary. She stated without lost thought, "Having all this but no one to share it with." Henry looked away, actually uncomfortable. "I'm used to it. I do not want all of us to do what I do." Leah wanted to trust him, but something in his tone advised in any other case before she may want to respond. Henry stood up. "If you want anything, Stephanie can help," he said, ending the communique that night. Leah went out to the mansion's terrace. The sky turned into clear and the metropolis lighting fixtures twinkled inside the distance. Sitting there, she let her thoughts wander. She thought approximately the sound of the baby's heartbeat she had heard all through the checkup, a sound that had affected her in approaches she could not give an explanation for. As much as she tried to hold emotional distance, it changed into becoming tougher when she heard footsteps in the back of her. Layla turned and saw Henry. He looked worn out, however. He nevertheless carried that equal inflexible posture. "You want this spot, do not you?" he asked as he approached. "I like the silence," she replied. "It helps me assume." He stopped beside her, looking at the city lighting fixtures for a second earlier than talking. Wondering isn't always an amazing factor. Leah laughed, but without a great deal humor. "Attempt telling that to a person who spends maximum in their time by myself." Henry did not reply right away. While he ultimately spoke, his voice turned into softer. Sometimes being surrounded via humans does not help a whole lot. Both Leo glanced at him, noticing an unhappiness in his phrases she hadn't heard earlier. "Then perhaps you need something you can't manage, Henry," she said, without filtering her thoughts. She did not remorse it. He frowned as though he wanted to reply, but decided towards it rather. He became and walked away, leaving Lila together with her own thoughts. Inside the weeks that accompanied Lila realized that, regardless of how difficult she tried, she could not maintain a strong barrier between herself and Henry. He remained enigmatic, but there had been moments whilst small fragments of his actual self appeared to slip through, and at the same time as she tried to hold her distance, something inside her desired to understand the man who had added her into this world. And at the same time, Henry observed himself grappling with emotions he couldn't name. He had entered this agreement looking ahead to simplicity and control. However, now he became beginning to see that this became a long way more complex. Leah wasn't simply a part of a plan, and that scared him. The subsequent week, it became time for every other checkup. Leah wakened early, feeling a mix of anxiety and interest. The months had been passing faster than she had imagined, and the concept of seeing the toddlers for the primary time, even on a display screen, made her coronary heart race. She puzzled if Henry might be there for this appointment, as he had been the final time whilst she got here down. For breakfast, she observed Stephanie going over the agenda with Henry prepared. Henry requested, looking up from the folder of documents in the front of him. "Prepared. Sufficient," Leah replied, looking to sound calmer than she felt. "Orson will cross collectively." He did not give any greater factors, but his tone left no room for dialogue. Leah headed to the automobile, feeling the silence between them heavier than traditional. Henry as continually became centered, but there has been something one of a kind in his demeanor. Perhaps he changed into as anxious as she turned into, though he could in no way admit it. At the health practitioner's office, the doctor greeted them with a warm smile. He motioned for Leela to lie down while he organized the ultrasound equipment. "These days we'll get a clearer view of the baby," the health practitioner defined. Adjusting the reveal, Leela looked at the screen, trying to ignore the bloodless gel the physician began making use of to her stomach whilst the transducer started to float over her skin. She held her breath, annoying approximately what turned into "to come" Henry's status beside her, crossed his hands, maintaining his eyes constant on the monitor. Then the sound came, the strong, steady rhythm of heartbeats, not simply one, but two, nicely. "Here's the wonder we couldn't see final time," the medical doctor stated, pointing to the display. "You're watching for twins." Leah's eyes widened in marvel. Twins? She had in no way considered that possibility. She felt a wave of emotion wash over her, a mix of shock and pleasure. Instinctively, she positioned a hand on her stomach, seeking to system the information. Henry, for his component, remained silent for some seconds, his serious expression giving way to something Lila had in no way visible earlier than real awe. He leaned slightly ahead, watching the display intently. He requested as if needing affirmation too. The health practitioner answered with a smile. Each seemed healthy and growing properly. The silence that accompanied became crammed only with the sound of the heartbeats echoing inside the room. For Lila, that second became magical. No matter how tough she attempted to remain emotionally distant, she could not assist, however, feel connected to the two lives in her. Permits play a sport with individuals who only read the comments kind. Pizza in the feedback, only those who get right here will apprehend now, allows hold with the tail. Henry's status beside her. Regarded, similarly moved. He remained quiet, but his eyes revealed something that phrases could not. Explicit, for the first time he regarded, inclined, touched. Through the idea of Biesbeck becoming a father to two on the way again to the mansion, the silence among them became exceptional. It wasn't the usual bloodless and distant silence, but some thing weighted down with meaning. Layla ultimately broke the silence. "You don't appear like the form of character who receives effortlessly surprised," she commented, seeking to lighten the tension. Henry sighed, his eyes fixed on the street. "I'm now not, however. This," he paused, selecting his words. "This is exclusive." Leah glanced at him, intrigued. Henry hardly ever showed emotions, but now he seemed lost in thought. "Is it horrifying?" she asked, almost in a whisper. He became slightly to have a look at her earlier than answering, "No, it is brilliant." Understanding that during a few months absolutely new beings might be right here relying on me. Leela felt a pang of ache in her chest. She knew that eventually she would have to permit move of these infants, but listening to him talk about them with such care made her realize how related she already turned into to them. "They also rely on me at the least, for now," she said, trying to hide the emotion in her voice. Henry nodded. "I recognize, and that's why I need to ensure you are okay, Lila. Now, not simply physically, however. In each way that is essential to me." She stayed silent, soaking up his phrases. It became the first time he had spoken so. Genuinely, approximately what they were going through together. Later that night, Lila changed into on the terrace, looking on the horizon. When Henry regarded again, he seemed hesitant, something uncommon in his usually assured demeanor. "I can't stop forestall thinking about what the health practitioner stated these days." He began sitting. Subsequent to her two infants' futures, Leah grew to become to him, surprised by using his openness. "It's loads of obligation, is not it?" she requested. "It is extra, then," that Henry stated, his gaze fixed on the horizon. "This is the first time I sense like something in my existence cannot be calculated. I cannot plan who those two will become. I can't manage who they will develop into." Layla felt a chill hearing those words. It became rare for Henry to confess that something was beyond his manage. She realized that, like her, he was converting, albeit reluctantly. "Sometimes that may be an excellent issue," she stated, "no longer knowing what's next. It could deliver things you never imagined." Henry checked out hers, even though he were considering her words for the primary time. He appeared to be accepting the concept that now not the whole lot in lifestyles would be planned in the following days. The information about the twins added an surprising lightness to the mansion. Stephanie started out making changes to the nursery that have been organized, now adapting it for two. Leela watched the alterations with blended emotions. She knew the agreement required her to surrender the babies, but deep down she realized it might be a ways more difficult than she had imagined as arrangements continued. Lila and Henry started out to look that the contract that had united them changed into becoming something a ways extra complex. The twins, now not even born, but were already reshaping their lives in ways neither of them had foreseen. The days following the revelation of the twins introduced a diffused but huge shift in Lila and Henry's dynamic, though he remained the equal, methodical and reserved man. Small gestures started out to emerge, revealing a side of him Lila hadn't predicted. One afternoon, after a clinical appointment, Henry insisted on escorting her to the car, something he would commonly depart to Stephanie or another workforce member. "Are you A-OK?" he asked, keeping the automobile door open for her. Leah nodded, surprised with the aid of the gesture. "Sure, I am. Great, thank you." On the drive back to the mansion, their usual silence changed into broken, whilst Henry asked, "Is there anything you need, whatever that might make you extra secure?" Leela glanced at him, looking to examine his expression. It failed to feel like a superficial issue. There has been something greater, proper about it. Even though she wasn't sure a way to interpret it, but nothing to thoughts right now. "But thanks for asking," she answered carefully. He nodded, and again his awareness to the road, however. Leah sensed that something was moving, regardless of her reservations. Henry seemed certainly involved about her back at the mansion. Leah noticed greater signs and symptoms of trade sooner or later. She located a hard and fast of latest pillows and blankets in her room, accompanied with the aid of a simple word to help you relaxation, higher. She couldn't assist but smile at the gesture. It turned into a small act, but it carried, which means later as she sipped tea inside the living room, Henry entered and quietly sat within the armchair opposite her. He regarded more at ease than typical, although still maintained his serious demeanor. "Did you like what I left to your room?" he requested bluntly. "Sure, I did." "It become considerate of you?" Leah answered, studying him interestingly. "Accurate? I need to ensure you're cozy. It's vital to me," he stated without looking away. Lee frowned slightly. As much as she preferred the kindness, there was nonetheless a barrier of distrust she couldn't pretty triumph over. "You're changing, Henry, or at least it appears that, evidently, manner, but I nonetheless do not know why," she said immediately. He stared at her for a second, as though finding out what to say. Subsequently he sighed. "Maybe you're proper. Perhaps I am changing, but the fact is I do not know how to be different. I'm no longer used to being concerned." The words seemed to surprise him as a lot as they did her. It'd become rare to look Henry admit any vulnerability. However, there he became revealing, a part of himself that always seemed locked away that night time. Lila reflected at the communication while looking at the sky from the terrace. Henry wasn't what she had anticipated. He was still hard to discern out, but there has been something human below that controlling exterior she simply didn't realize. If that changed into an awesome or terrible issue, Henry in the meantime became, in his workplace, observing the settlement that defined his association with Lila. For the first time he felt the burden of that report. He had begun this with a clear purpose, to have an heir and move on together with his life. Now things were not so easy, he knew. He became starting to care, and that terrified him. The next morning Henry joined Layla for breakfast, something he not often did. "There's something I would like to speak about," he said immediately. Layla looked up, curious. "What is it?" He hesitated before answering. "I know you still don't consider me, and that I can't blame you. I've by no means been good at trusting human beings, and that's became me into a person who maybe isn't easy to deal with." Layla stayed silent, letting him maintain, "I've had stories that taught me not to depend upon anyone, to now not permit all and sundry get near enough to hurt me. However, with you, with what we're building, I realize that perhaps I'm incorrect." She blinked, amazed by way of his honesty. It was rare to listen Henry talk about himself this manner. "All of us have our boundaries, Henry," she stated softly, "but that does not mean we need to hide behind them all the time." He nodded, seeming to consider her phrases. "Perhaps you are right, however. How changing isn't always easy for me." Lila gave a small smile. No person stated it'd be later that day. Henry decided to sign up for her for a stroll within the lawn. They talked approximately trivial things before everything but the verbal exchange. Quickly back to the toddlers. "Have you ever concept, approximately names?" he asked, surprising her. No longer yet I notion that becomes something you'll want to determine in your personal." She answered, "I think it would be truthful to do it collectively," he said to Leia's amazement. She found out that Henry became looking to be greater, open, more gift. And at the same time, as she changed into nonetheless cautious, she couldn't forget about that, he changed into making an attempt. Because the sun set, they sat on a bench within the lawn, watching the warm hues of the sky. "I by no means imagined I would be here doing something like this," Leia stated almost to herself. "Neither did I," Henry responded with a slight smile. "However, maybe this is exactly wherein we need to be." Leah looked at him, noticing that for the first time Henry regarded to be letting his defend down, perhaps simply. Maybe there has been a danger that this wasn't just a contract, but the beginning of something lots larger. The morning began like any other. Leah felt the load of the months of pregnancy in each motion. However, she changed into determined to keep her habitual Henry, as common turned into in the workplace, buried in documents. Their interactions, now more common, had come to be a sort of silent comfort for both, but that day something changed into specific just earlier than lunch. Layla felt an unexpected ache. It had become exceptional from any soreness she had felt earlier than. She attempted to ignore it, wondering it turned into just another typical pregnancy ache. However, the intensity accelerated. Alon, she known as Stephanie, who straight away realized the seriousness of the scenario. "Henry desires to realize approximately this," Stephanie said, helping Lila to take a seat down. "This will be the begin of labor." Layla nodded, trying to manage her breathing as any other wave of pain hit her. Stephanie went to get Henry, who appeared in the room within minutes. Seeing her, his generally emotionless face showed something uncommon true. Concern. "Layla," Henry. "What is happening?" he requested, Speedy drawing close. "I think it's going on," she said, gasping. "The babies are coming." For a moment Henry appeared frozen, but he regained control. He grabbed the phone, ordering the driving force to get the auto equipped and instructing Stephanie to acquire the whole lot they could need for the hospital. "We're going now," he stated, his voice company but with a touch of urgency that Lila had by no means heard earlier than the experience. To the clinic become a blur of feelings. Lila targeted on managing the ache, even as Henry, sitting next to her, watched her with a combination of anxiety and willpower. He held her hand throughout the trip, a gesture that regarded automatic, however, changed into complete of "that means." "We're nearly there," he said, squeezing her hand gently. "Yuk BK, we'll BK." Layla failed to reply, but she felt a unusual calm from his words on the sanatorium. The entirety happened fast. A clinical crew become already on standby thanks to Henry's meticulous planning, and Lila changed into taken straight to the shipping room. He stayed by, using her side the whole time, refusing to leave, regardless of the group of workers' attempts to get him to wait outdoor. "I'm staying," he stated firmly, retaining Lila's hand. "I'm not going everywhere." Throughout the hours that observed, Henry witnessed something he never imagined. Lila's electricity as she brought the twins into the world every second appeared limitless, but also full of an iron depth he had by no means skilled. Ultimately, the first cry filled the room. The sound was each small and powerful, reverberating like a wave of emotion. "A boy," the health practitioner introduced, smiling. "A stunning, healthy boy." Henry felt his coronary heart race. He couldn't take his eyes off the child, being carefully located on a close-by desk, earlier than he ought to. Fully procedure what became taking place. A 2D cry crammed the room. A lady, his daughter Layla, exhausted but with eyes shining, looked at the two infants being lightly cleaned and wrapped in blankets. She desired to keep them, but she knew the moment could be brief. Henry stood, frozen for some seconds, looking the health practitioner's paintings. Then, as if something in him had ultimately given way, he stepped toward Leela, took her hand and said, "You have been outstanding. Thank you." Silent tears streamed down Leela's face. However, she could not inform if they were from joy, comfort, or a heart already beginning to interrupt quickly after the infants had been passed to her. Leia held them carefully, feeling the warm temperature and fragility of their small lives. She studied them, taking in every detail. Their closed eyes, tiny hands, transferring involuntarily. It turned into an awesome love. And she knew it'd be impossible to depart them without wearing a part of them forever. Henry stayed with the aid of her son, aspect silent, however, visibly moved, while he sooner or later held the boy in his fingers. His hardened expression softened in a way Leela had never seen before. He appeared to attach with something a long way beyond the concept of an inheritor. It turned into life in its purest shape. a bond he had by no means experienced. While he held the lady, Henry closed his eyes for a moment, as if seeking to imprint the second into his reminiscence. Whilst he opened them, he checked out Leela, and she or he saw something she in no way expected. Real gratitude. Their ideal, he stated, his voice tough with emotion. Leah nodded, still retaining the boy. Tears fell freely now, but she failed to care that night. Whilst Lila rested in her room, Henry stayed by means of the toddler's side in the hospital statement location. He watched them sleep, feeling a flood of feelings he did not understand how to control. For the primary time, he found out these kids were not simply a part of a plan or a legacy. They were his connection to something more, something he had by no means allowed himself to feel before. Genuine love. Stephanie arrived carrying coffee. She positioned the cup on a nearby desk and gently requested, "Mr. Lewis, is the whole thing all right?" Henry looked at her, in reality suffering to locate the right words for the primary time in a protracted at the same time as, "I suppose it is," he replied. Stephanie smiled and left, leaving him alone with his thoughts. And his children in the meantime. Leah woke up in her room feeling a heavy loneliness. As a lot as she desired to be happy, glad she knew the settlement nonetheless loomed over the entirety. The infants, now the center of her existence, wouldn't be hers for tons longer. But whilst she looked at the door and saw Henry strolling in with each infant in his fingers, something internal her shifted. He regarded exceptional, as if that second had converted no longer just his courting with the babies. However, additionally, along with her, he approached the mattress, passed her the boy and sat beside her, maintaining the girl. I do not know how, however. That has changed everything, he confessed, searching at the twins. Leela nodded, understanding that no matter how difficult what came next would be, this moment became a miracle. She might by no means neglect months later. Henry's mansion became steeped in a heavy silence. Leela knew what the day meant. The weeks following the twins' birth had been a mixture of joy and suffering. She loved them greater than she ever thought feasible. However, the settlement became clean. Her time there has been coming to an give up nowadays, changed into the day she turned into supposed to go away, everything behind, as she packed her few property right into a small suitcase. Lila glanced on the baby's cribs, wherein they nonetheless slept peacefully. Tears threatened to fall, but she refused to cry. She did not want her ultimate reminiscences to be marked through weak spots. She knew what she had signed, and tried to persuade herself it became the right issue to do. Stephanie knocked softly on the door, getting into with an involved expression. "Is the whole thing geared up?" she asked quietly. Leela nodded, swallowing her feelings. "Yes, thank you for the whole lot." Stephanie, the assistant, looked at her, hesitating. "Earlier than talking, are you certain this is what you need? It looks as if there may be something greater between you and Mr. Lewis." Leela pressured a smile, though her coronary heart felt heavy. "It's now not approximately what I want, it's about what turned into agreed upon." Stephanie did not press. Similarly, she surely left the room, promising to allow Henry. Recognized Leela, turned into a quip to go away, while she came down the steps along with her suitcase in hand. Leela observed Henry waiting within the lobby. He'd become standing by way of the front door, his eyes constant on her. There has been no hint of the bloodless, calculating guy she had met at the beginning. The Henry standing there, regarded distinct prone, as though he turned into approximately to lose something crucial. "The entirety's ready," Leela said, breaking the silence. He failed to reply. Right now, as a substitute, he took a step towards her, his gaze extreme. "Are you absolutely leaving?" he requested, his voice low, almost hoarse. Leela felt a lump in her throat, but remained firm. That, become the deal, I've completed my component, now it's time to flow on. Henry stood still for a moment, earlier than accomplishing, into the interior pocket of his coat, and, pulling out the settlement, he held the document between his hands as though it was something insignificant. "This agreement," he started, his voice steadier now, "need to in no way have defined what's going on between us, earlier than Lila may want to respond." Henry tore the paper into pieces, allowing them to fall to the floor. The sound echoed via the lobby like a assertion. "I don't want you to head, Leah. I do not need this to give up here." Leia iced over her eyes, fixed at the pieces of paper at the floor. Her heart raced, but ache and worry saved her hesitant Henry. You cannot simply tear up a settlement and anticipate that to exchange the entirety. It's no longer that easy. He took any other step towards her, his expression complete of emotion. I know. It's now not easy. Not anything about this has been simple for me. However, those past few months have proven me something I never had the braveness to admit. I want you, Layla, no longer simply due to the fact of the twins, but due to the fact you introduced something into my lifestyles that I failed to even recognize. Become missing. His words hit her hard, but she shook her head, trying to face up to, and the way do I recognize that is real? She asked, her voice trembling. How am I able to believe that you may not alternate your mind, which you won't shrink back while matters get difficult? Henry took a deep breath, seeming to conflict together with his own insecurities due to the fact, I've already tried dwelling without feeling anything for anybody, and it left me empty. You showed me that I do not need to be frightened of connecting, of being human, and sure, it scares me. However, I do not need to lose this. Lose? Yuli felt tears streaming down her face, but there has been still a barrier she couldn't triumph over. I fell in love with you, Henry, she admitted, her voice filled with emotion. However, you do not apprehend how tough it's far to trust someone again. I have spent my complete existence being discarded, unnoticed. How am I able to agree with you? May not do the same. Henry moved closer now, so close to that she may want to sense his breath. Because you modified the whole lot for me. And I'm now not the sort of man who says that lightly. I do not know a way to show it to you, Leah, but I am willing to attempt each day for the relaxation of my life. If you deliver me that chance. His words had been like a blow to her defenses. Layla felt something interior her approximately to offer way. She knew there were risks, but for the primary time she'd taken into consideration that maybe it become worth facing them. What if it would not work out? She requested nearly in a whisper. Henry took her arms, looking without delay into her eyes. Then, we will try again. And again, if necessary. I might not give up on you, Lila, never for a moment. The arena appeared to forestall. Lila felt her doubts start to fade, replaced via something stronger hope. She checked out Henry, understanding that he turned into sincerely, willing to let cross of his manipulate his boundaries to be together with her. Finally, she nodded, letting the tears fall freely. "Kay, I will stay." Henry let loose a sigh of relief and pulled her into a tight embody. For the first time, Lila felt that this become in which she turned into, meant to be the day, turned into just breaking at Henry's mansion. Lila woke to the tender sounds of the twins inside the nursery next door. There was something, one of a kind. Approximately that morning, for the primary time in a lengthy while, she did not feel the weight of uncertainty or the tension of dwelling beneath the terms of her agreement she had selected to live. And, more importantly, Henry had chosen to open his heart, allowing them to construct something together. Lila got up and went to the nursery. She located the two little ones, unsleeping. Softly as they moved in their cribs, she leaned over every of them, stroking their rosy cheeks and whispering phrases of love. Before she could wander away, within the moment she heard footsteps in the back of her. It became Henry. He stood in the doorway, looking at the scene with a slight smile. His eyes, which had continually conveyed manage and distance, were now softer, filled with something Lila may want to most effective describe as love. "Excellent morning," he said, entering into the room and drawing near the babies properly. "Morning," Layla said as Henry picked up the toddler boy in his arms. He looked at the toddler with a sparkle in his eyes. "I do not think I ever imagined this second would experience so natural," he confessed nearly to himself. Leela smiled, watching him grow into his role as a father. There has been something deeply pleasing about seeing him so. Devoted to the twins, the weeks that followed were a time of adjustment. Henry, even though inexperienced, made an effort to learn a way to care for the toddlers, supporting Leela every time he could. He modified diapers, though. He changed into a bit clumsy at the beginning, gave bottles, or even sang lullaby. regardless of his growly voice, no longer being the maximum melodic for Lila. This determination was proof that he became, without a doubt, converting one evening as they sat on the sofa with the twins snoozing of their cribs nearby. Henry grew to become, to Lila, "I've been considering something," he said, his expression severe, however calm. "What is it?" she requested, curious. He took a deep breath earlier than continuing. "I need us to be a real family, no longer simply because of the twins, however, due to the fact I need you via my facet for all time." Lila changed into silent, greatly surprised by means of the acute of his words. She knew their emotions, for each different had grown, however. Listening to that confession became something she hadn't expected. "Henry, this is a massive step," she answered, trying to manner the moment. "Are you sure?" He took her hands, searching deeply into her eyes. "I've never been extra certain of whatever in my lifestyles. I understand this won't be clean, and I realize I made mistakes within the beginning. However, I need to build something with you, something that is no longer primarily based on contracts or duties." However, on love his phrases had been honest, and Lila knew it. Tears welled up in her eyes as she nodded. "I want that too, Henry." Let un attempt a few weeks later, an intimate ceremony, became held in the mansion's gardens. Only some close humans had been invited, including Stephanie and other body of workers, contributors who had turned out to be an essential part of their journey. The day became perfect, with the sun shining and a gentle breeze transferring through the plants that decorated the venue. Leia wore a easy yet elegant dress, whilst Henry regarded appeared sharp in a healthy. The twins, dressed adorably, were in Stephanie's hands, who couldn't conceal her tears of joy, while Henry and Layla exchanged vows. They each spoke from the heart. Henry promised to be the person she deserved, a person who would constantly stand by way of her regardless of what Leia in flip promised to consider him and assist him turn out to be the best version of himself on the quit of the right. As they stood, embracing each other whilst keeping the twins, Stephanie remarked, "You're making a beautiful family." And it was authentic. For the first time, Henry, Layla and the babies had been exactly in which they had been intended to be after the right existence. Persevered with its challenges, but additionally with moments of joy. Henry and Lila worked collectively to create a heat-loving domestic for the twins. They discovered to be parents going through sleepless nights and constant needs, with a mix of exhaustion and happiness. One night time as Lila was placing the toddlers to bed, Henry seemed on the bedroom door. He walked as much as her, and without pronouncing a word, wrapped her in a tight embrace. Lila rested her head towards his chest, paying attention to the constant heartbeat that had turned out to be so acquainted. "Thank you for now not giving up on me," he said softly. "Thank you for showing me I ought to trust once more." She spoke back, "Months in a while." A sunny afternoon, Henry and Lila have been in the garden watching the twins play on a smooth mat within the grass. The child's laughter crammed the air, spreading pure infectious pleasure. Lila became to Henry, who changed into sitting beside her and saw him smiling. "Are you glad?" she asked, simply curious. He checked out her and then at the twins. Earlier than answering, "I never thought I would be this glad," he said. "You've given me more than I ever knew I needed. Leah, a own family, a cause, love." Leela smiled, feeling a peace she hadn't felt in a long time. "And you have proven me that love can be constructed even via challenges. Thanks for that," as they leaned in for a gentle kiss. The twins started to babble something that appeared like Mama and Dada. Henry and Lila laughed, crushed with emotion, and moved towards the infants, wrapping them in all of the love they'd, that moment simple and unassuming, turned into proof that they had found something actual. It wasn't a great lifestyles, however. It became complete of love, knowledge, and hope, and that was all they had to circulate ahead. What did you suspect of Henry's movements? Share your mind in the comments. How might you charge this story from 0 to 10? Enroll in the channel and switch on notifications to keep up with all our stories. And don't forget to check out more touching stories.